Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. A little later in the program, we're going to be talking entitlements and how we can afford them. But first, on your ballot, number 65. I don't understand it. It's something about donations and corporations and whoever. So whenever I'm confused, I ask former Senator Ken Gordon to explain it to us. Ken, thank you for being here. Also from AriArmstrong.com and work with the Independence Institute. Ari Armstrong, thank you for being here.
Thank you, John.
I have a feeling you're going to be a little disagreeing on this. Tell me, what is 64? Why are you making me vote on this?
65.
Okay,
65.
First,
65.
It's 65. All right. Well, the United States Supreme Court has passed some, or has decided some cases recently where they say that there are no limits on the amount of money that can go into campaigns and no limits on who can make those contributions. So campaigns that used to cost thousands of dollars now cost millions. Campaigns that used to cost millions cost billions. And the money comes from interest groups that are trying to buy influence. And so there are a lot of people that don't think that the Supreme Court was right when they made this equivalence between money and speech. And so what Amendment 65 does is it says that in order to change that, we need a constitutional amendment. And it
a federal
United States constitutional amendment, and it encourages the members of Congress from Colorado to refer a constitutional amendment saying that we can limit the amount of money that's spent in campaigns, and the members of the Colorado legislature to ratify that amendment once it's referred. So it allows Coloradans to actually express their view on money and politics and say, if they believe it to be true, that elections should be decided by people and not money, that this is a chance for them to vote for.
All right, so let me regurgitate that and let me see if I got it. This says, please, our federal delegation, please pass something that refers a constitutional amendment to the state, and state legislators, please ratify that.
Right.
There's nothing binding here.
Nothing binding. But this is actually how direct election of senators passed in some states. The people did a referendum or an initiative, direct democracy, to say we want to elect senators, we don't want them appointed by legislatures, and then they held the legislatures accountable, and that's why we ended up with electing senators instead of having them appointed by legislatures.
Bring it over here. It's not binding. Colorado's just telling the legislatures that they want to, if they have the chance, please ratify this. Get rid of the Citizens United case. But let's do a little backdrop on that. That was after McCain-Feingold passed, and the Supreme Court said that is constitutional, which blew my mind. And then they came back and said, well, maybe not all of it's constitutional. They gave us Citizens United. What's the problem with 65? Excuse me.
Well, you're right, it's not binding, and in fact, the language in it is totally vague. It's basically a blank check. It's basically, somebody described it as a letter to Santa Claus. Pretty please, Congress, we don't like these nasty campaign ads. Would you please magically make those go away? But you know, we already have a federal amendment to the United States Constitution pertaining to speech, and it's served us pretty well so far. It's called the First Amendment. And so basically our choice is between the First Amendment and free speech, or allowing politicians and their appointed bureaucrats to control speech. The proper name for that is censorship. So I advocate the side of free speech. This is asking for politicians to censor speech about politicians.
Why is this free speech? He's talking about money. He's not talking about speech. He's talking about dollars.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So it's not the case that anybody is saying that money is literally the same thing as speech. Obviously, that's silly. But instead, the position is that to speak, unless you're talking about just yelling on the street corner, it requires the expenditure of resources. So in other words, you either have to have a computer to blog, you have to have a microphone to speak, you have to have radio signals or television broadcasts. Any form of speech to reach an audience requires the expenditure of resources. So if you're talking about limiting people's ability to spend money on speech, you're talking about limiting their ability to speak. I mean, the First Amendment is not about talking to yourself in your living room. The First Amendment protects your right to advocate your views in the public arena, and that requires the expenditure of resources.
Let me show a couple of pictures here. This is
that you as a young man?
Norman Rockwell, Saturday Evening Post cover, a man exercising his right to free speech. Here's a recent political cartoon. 2 piles of money, free speech, more free speech. Some people make an equivalence, say that this is just as protected as this is. If that's true, then huge amounts of money are actually going to interfere with his ability to speak. And that's what's happening in the United States.
Well, I don't follow you. Help me understand that, Ken.
Okay.
If I'm at a city council meeting and I get my 2 minutes of citizen participation, or I'm at my church and I want to step up and say, we ought to do this, I can do so. And if Ari wants to spend his considerable resources, which I'm sure they're pretty big, and buy radio ads, he can do that as well. Why is this mutually exclusive? I can still speak up whether he spends money or if he doesn't.
Let's say we're at a town meeting, and Ari and the people that have money all have megaphones, and the people that don't have money don't have megaphones. And then everybody starts speaking. The people who have the money have their voices heard in the public debate. People that don't have their voices heard. That's one part of it. The other problem, let me finish.
One thing at a time. That's being heard. The First Amendment's about speaking, that you have a right to speak. I'm hearing that you want a right to be heard.
Well, I think that's part of it. The Constitution has always allowed time, place, and manner restrictions. It's okay to say that you can't have a sound truck going through a neighborhood in the middle of the night saying, vote for Caldara. So part of the ability to speak is the ability to be heard. It's part of, when you say you have a marketplace of ideas, it doesn't help if you can't be heard. But there's one other problem, and this is actually probably the bigger problem. This kind of speech doesn't create any obligation on the listener. This kind of speech does create an obligation on the listener. And this money is used to attach strings to elected officials and to get them to vote with you later on. If the oil industry or the pharmaceutical industry or the real estate industry makes huge campaign contributions and gets a lot of people elected with those contributions, then they don't say, okay, go off and do good. They say, now that we've gotten you elected, there's some bills we'd like to talk to you about that we think we'd like to see you pass. Or vote against.
It's not like people don't love these laws. People wanted McCain-Feingold, and I think that drew a lot of money underground. Here in Colorado was Amendment 27, which is now Article 28 of the Constitution, which makes us do all sorts of weird things. And I see more money in politics in Colorado elections than ever before. It's just that the candidate doesn't run his elections. Other people now run the elections for him, and he doesn't have much say. People love this idea because they want nicer ads. They don't want to be bombarded as they are this time of year.
Well, I think that's a good point. Some of the previous campaign restrictions just resulted in these same big money groups spending their monies in different ways, which leads to an important consideration about this. Who are the same? You're worried about special interests influencing politics. Well, do you think that this law that we're asking Congress to pass is going to be passed in some magical, angelic land where these special interests aren't applicable anymore? No, they're going to be written by the exact same politicians that we're complaining about right now, but who are influenced by the exact same special interests that we're concerned about right now. So if your concern is, hey, money in politics is corrupting the system, this isn't going to stop lobbying. This isn't going to even stop campaign contributions. What it's going to do is put the same corrupt political system in charge of our speech, which is not going to serve to keep big money that are trying to buy influence out of politics. Instead, it's going to be used to impose a bunch of bureaucratic regulations and red tape to keep actual citizens who want to speak their minds out of the system. This is how it, in fact, works now under the existing campaign laws. That is how it will work to a greater extent if we expand those laws. So Ken has a picture between money and speech, and he says, well, these nasty big money groups buy influence. But look, let's remember, there's a lot of people out there, including businesses, who really believe what they're doing. They are really, in some cases, trying to defend themselves against what they regard, and I would often agree, are egregious abuses of government. Why should they be prevented from doing that? Basically, it comes down to, well, I disagree with certain people, so I want to shut them up by government force.
That's not exactly it. I'm worried about equality of political voice. In the Declaration of Independence, it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. And what I read that to mean is that everybody's vote should count the same. Every human being should have about the same political voice and in deciding how their government should be constructed and the policies and who's got elected. And right now, extremely wealthy people and corporations and unions any interest group has a much bigger voice than individual human beings who are of modest or average means. And that has shifted the debates to the interests of extreme wealth. For instance, some people say that it's pluralism. You know, you've got your billionaires on your side, and there's billionaires on this side, so it all works out. But it's not true. If elected officials are busy talking to these billionaires, and all of a sudden it seems like the biggest issue facing America is what the capital gains tax is, and not whether, you know, people can get a job or stay in their homes or get health care.
We're going to run out of time soon enough, but let me ask you. Here in Colorado, not only do we have McCain-Feingold, which applies to national elections, but we've had Amendment 27, and I haven't seen that ratcheting down of money has really helped the debate. Matter of fact, candidates don't run their elections. If you're running for election now, I can only give you $400. So we're funneling money through 527 groups and other committees. And by the way, Democrats are the ones that have the, I'm forgetting, independent expenditures 50 times more than what Republicans do here. And all of a sudden we don't know who's spending what on what. I would argue that since we put in campaign finance laws here in Colorado, ugly campaigning has gotten much worse, has it not?
The actual influence on legislators, I think, has been reduced by the campaign contribution limits. It used to be that in Colorado that you could get any amount of money for any campaign. Now it's restricted. And I think that does actually make the legislators somewhat less dependent or tied to their contributors. So I would say that it had some positive effect. But you're right. This is a fight, I say, that we have to fight every day. You never completely win and you never completely lose, but the world's better because you engage in the fight. And the fight is on behalf of ordinary people against those who have a lot of money and a lot of power and want more. That's the fight.
Right. Well, we've got a couple of minutes left here. Tell me, why should people vote against this?
Well, again, we agree that there are problems with certain interest groups trying to buy influence. But what this measure does is it puts those interest groups in charge of censoring the speech of their competitors. And so we talk about ordinary citizens. First, it's offensive to say that business owners are not ordinary citizens. They're somehow the evil. They're the devil. Okay, that's not true. And that's,
or union members.
And the equality that the bill declaration refers to
making contributions
is equality under the law, where everyone's rights are respected and protected equally, and that's what I advocate, and that's what this opposes. And in fact, if you're looking at the ordinary small player, these sorts of laws are precisely what ensnares the small sorts of speakers, like the Citizens United, after which the case was named, who was just a relatively small group trying to put out a documentary. I mean, so what you're doing is creating a system where politicians get to shut up the people that they don't like, essentially.
All right, let's bring it home. Bring it home and take a quick half minute here and tell us why we need to vote yes.
Money is increasing at 5.5 times the rate of inflation, the amount that's spent in campaigns. The vote of an actual person becomes less important as money becomes more important. It's a big problem. It slants outcomes towards money, towards pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, banks, wealthy interests. And the ordinary person's voice is getting heard less. And I would say, what's your answer to that problem? If you don't want to do anything about the amount of money that goes into campaigns, if you want to just let any amount go in from any source, corporations, wealthy people, unlimited money, then what's the answer?
What's the problem? All right, Ken, thank you. Ari, thank you.
Thank you.
Stay tuned.